Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Duke Wisdom Podcast. Ben McCormick here with Clinton Weaver. We're going to recap two very different games, as Clinton just told me before we started recording. A 8-point win over Notre Dame that maybe should have been more than that. We'll talk about that. And then a 35-point win over the dead last in the ACC, Jim Larinaga-less Miami Hurricanes. So a good two-game stretch nonetheless, no matter how the wins came. Now the winning streak is at 11 for Duke. But first, before we dive into the nooks and crannies of the actual games, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Cooper Flagg, he had a little bit of a game against Notre Dame. It wasn't so bad. It was actually so good that my boss was texting me, and he was like, "This is the first time I've watched Duke this year." And he was like, Cooper Flagg is just a different guy, man. And I said, yeah, he's absolutely a monster. So 42 points by Cooper Flagg, 6 rebounds, 7 assists. That 42 points, the most by a Blue Devil since J.J. Redick in 2006. He is just now the 8th player in Duke basketball history to cross the 40-point threshold in a single game. The others he joins, of course, the all-time scoringest game in Duke history, a 58-point game by Danny Ferry against Miami. Then Dick Grote had 48. He had 46 as well. Jeff Mullins with 43. Those are the only 3 players that have scored more in a Duke basketball game than Cooper Flagg. His 42 is tied with Tate Armstrong for the 5th most in a game ever. Other guys to cross the 40 threshold, I mentioned Redick. He did it 3 times. Bob Verga and Art Heyman as well crossed that threshold. But this is, just a monster milestone for him. I know everybody was sitting there hoping he was going to cross that threshold. I think there's some people that would argue maybe they were trying a little too hard to get him to that threshold. I'd push back on that, and we'll get to that. But just a monster performance by him. I'd be remiss if I did not mention it is the all-time scoringest game by a freshman, not only just in Duke history, but in ACC history. And that Duke record was set, or at least tied, by Jared McCain last year. Against Florida State, and poor Jared, that record didn't last too long. Usually records last a lot longer than that, but in the era of the uber-talented one and done, your freshman scoring records are not safe. A just terrifically efficient, insane performance by Cooper Flagg. And so I want to bring up the first topic of this is the best performance that you've seen by a Duke player, that you've been the most impressed by since what player and what game, Clinton?
Well, that's hard to say. I was around for the Tate Armstrong era. He was an Olympian. He was pretty darn good as an offensive player, but he didn't have near the dimensionality that Cooper has. It's not just his scoring. It's everything. Coming out of the Miami game, my wife turned to me and said, that Cooper Flagg guy is pretty good. And I said, well, you should have seen him in the previous game. Because, he's impressive even when he's not scoring. And I think that's what's so amazing about him. His game is so well-rounded. And everyone just talks about his energy. And he's just like the Energizer Bunny out there nonstop. And his competitive fire that burns so bright that he doesn't give up on any play, the points are impressive, and there may be more to come. Who knows? Most of those jerseys are hanging in the rafters at Duke that you mentioned, all except for Armstrong, actually. In terms of any one given performance, certainly in terms of ones that I've witnessed, this would have to be at the top of the list.
Yeah, I think there's not a single doubt in my mind that this is the most impressive game I've ever seen a Duke player put up. I think the only game that even remotely rivals this in terms of just an individual performance, not only in terms of points, but like the context in which it happened, is Ryan Kelly against Miami. That 36-point game in his first game back against, what was, I think, a top 5 Miami team. That was a terrific performance by Ryan, but I think this one just is an overall game. Getting his hands, his influence on every single thing that happens in the game. Duke's offense ran almost single-handedly through Cooper Flagg for the majority of that second half. To a fault, I might say, because down the stretch, it got to a point where that was an issue. But nonetheless, that doesn't detract from the fact that this was just a spectacular performance. Now, kind of moving on to the next part of this Cooper Flagg discussion, and it might be a little premature to have this conversation, but there are people talking about, there are people even floating the idea, what if Duke wins a national title this year, is Cooper Flagg could he get his jersey retired? Well, the simple answer is no, because there are rules and regulations to that at Duke. You have to graduate. But then that kind of segues into the next part of the conversation, which is, how does he match up against the all-time great one and dones? And we've talked about that a little bit. But like at this point, having seen a performance like that, I mean, Cooper Flagg is the best Duke basketball player since who, in your opinion?
I want to go back to what you just said about his jersey won't ever hang in the rafters at Cameron, because I kind of feel like if he wins the national championship, who cares that he's been there 1 year? If he's one of the greatest of all time, who cares that he hadn't graduated? We're in a different era, and those rules were written a long time ago, and they made sense at the time. We wanted to reward the 4-year guys and all that. But times have changed. And if he belongs in the Pantheon, he belongs in the Pantheon. And that's where the Pantheon is. It's up there in the rafters of Cameron. So I say, take number 2 out of service if he brings home the title.
Well, here's the question. I mean, he would have say he gets the National Player of the Year as well. So he'd have National Championship, National Player of the Year. He would be only one of 3 Blue Devils to ever do that in the same season, the other 2 being Shane Battier and Christian Laettner. Now, obviously, that would put him in a class of his own as a freshman. But I think if you open that door, and this is me just playing devil's advocate, but if you open that door, does that mean Duke's going to also start entertaining the idea of retiring Zion Williamson's jersey, a freshman National Player of the Year, or Jaleel Okafor, the best player on a national championship team? Is it a bad thing if they were to retire those players' numbers? Like, you think those guys deserve it too?
If Zion had brought home the national championship, yeah. I mean, maybe they need to have a subsection or something. I don't know. And I understand the argument about we don't want to be like Carolina, where every number from 0 to 99 is hanging in the rafters. You have to be reasonable about it, or it loses its distinctiveness, and it's so I understand the need to have some criteria, but he passes the eye test, right? He's Grote-like, he's Ferry-like. I mean, he's better than Danny Ferry, So, yeah. I mean, I think there's just sort of an argument based on just common sense. One of the best players, named the best player, wins the national title. Yeah. Take that jersey off and put it up there.
Well, man, I want so desperately for a Duke to have a jersey retirement. Like, they haven't retired a jersey since I was in elementary school. Like it has been a very long time since they have retired a jersey. I just want to see it. I want, as like a fully formed adult, I want to see and experience Duke retiring a jersey. But the only likely candidates, they've floated Kyle Singler's name in the discussion. I think probably the most likely graduate would be John Shire. Now, he's obviously not going to work to get his own jersey retired, but if he does enough as a coach, I feel like he would become one of the most notable names in Duke history. They might put his jersey up there. But I might kind of be with you at this point. Like, I think for a long time I was like, nah, you got to graduate, because then that opens this whole door of so many other people getting their jersey retired. But, man, are we ever going to do it again? Like, is there ever going to be a 4-year player that's that good at Duke? Probably not. And so the new Christian Laettner, the new Shane Battier is Cooper Flagg. It's Zion Williamson, Jaleel Okafor. And so I just want to see a jersey retired, man. If we got to compromise on a little bit of the rules, I think that's okay. I think those rules shouldn't be so hard and fast. They're really hard and fast rules at Carolina. Like, it's win National Player of the Year, nothing. Duke's got like a million different criteria that I feel like they just started making up along the way so they could retire certain players' jerseys. Like I feel like the criteria of leading all time at Duke or the NCAA in a statistical category was not a criteria for getting your jersey retired until Bobby Hurley. And then they decided that's a new criteria because we want to retire Bobby Hurley's jersey. So why not make a new criteria that's if you win National Player of the Year and the national title in the same season, you automatically get your jersey retired. I don't think that's unfair.
I think the only rule should be John Shire cannot retire his own jersey because then he'd have to hand the plaque to himself at the ceremony. And that would be a clear-cut conflict of interest. Other than that, if you deserve it.
That could be kind of funny.
Yeah, it could be. On behalf of Duke, I'd like to give this to myself.
So, okay, well, we're getting a little too far ahead of ourselves because opposing fan bases can find what we're saying here if Duke loses come March and really hold this against us. We might be getting a little too cocky, but let's talk about something a little bit more, or still lofty, but less lofty than jersey retirement and national championship. And that's what I've been bringing up a couple times already, the National Player of the Year discussion. Cooper Flagg's 42-point performance coincidentally coincided with Janai Broom getting injured. Literally within minutes of each other. And so there was this whole thing where Cooper Flagg had already just after the 42-point performance taken over as the Vegas favorite to win National Player of the Year, and there were some Duke accounts posting that. And then, of course, Broom gets injured minutes later, and everybody's, like, you're insensitive. I can't believe you would post this. And it's like, well, okay. But, both coming together, and I will say this, I would never want Janai Broom to get injured. My discussion of how this helps Cooper Flagg's discussion is not me going, yay, Janai Broom got injured. I never want that to happen. I absolutely want Duke's best competition to be fully healthy when they play them because that makes it more impressive. They earn it even more if they get the win. And I wish Broom a speedy recovery. I hope he gets back to playing and he's still very much in that conversation. But it does seem now that Cooper Flagg has taken a vice hold on the National Player of the Year discussion. He is in the driver's seat now. Janai was in the driver's seat and he was sitting passenger. They kind of switched spots this past weekend. And so I think we're in a big position now where Cooper Flagg can become the fourth freshman all-time to win National Player of the Year, the second Blue Devil to do so. Of course, joining Zion, the other two freshmen that won were Kevin Durant and Anthony Davis. And that's pretty good company if he's able to do it. How important is the National Player of the Year trophy to you? And do you think Cooper Flagg will hold on, injuries permitting, hold on to win it?
Quite possibly. I certainly hope that Broom has a full recovery by the second week in April or thereabouts. Want to see him, ready to do well and whatever the next phase of his career might bring. But, injuries are part of the game. We lost the National Defensive Player of the Year on the same day. Isn't that interesting? So injuries are just part of the game, and every team has to deal with them. It'd be great if he was Freshman of the Year, Player of the Year. He deserves whatever accolades are coming his way, unless that something radically different happens over the second half of the season.
So you mentioned Maliq Brown. That's a good transition. Obviously, Duke had it of its own with Malik, and so during the game he's up walking around on it. They're not putting ice on it. I'm thinking this probably isn't very serious. John Shire, though, doesn't seem very encouraged about it, and then of course they do some testing, and he's basically saying he's going to be out for an extended period of time. What does extended period of time mean? Who knows? Does that mean 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks? I don't know. For me, I think Duke can do without Maliq Brown. Obviously, it hurts. I think if Malik's back before, the end of the regular season, Duke should be okay. If you're going to be the eternal optimist, you can view it as an opportunity for Duke's other big men, its other front court members, to get some really good run here. But on the other hand, it's like, well, if it's worse than we thought, you don't want him sitting out in the postseason at all. that becomes a problem in terms of depth and defensive versatility. Maliq Brown, incredibly important. Now, there's a couple little, I guess, asterisks here that are positive asterisks if you're Duke. One, Maliq Brown was already dealing with a toe injury that he was playing on, that he was not rehabbing. And so I guess being sidelined with this knee injury gives him the opportunity to rehab both injuries at the same time. And so I think that's important. Another thing is he only averages like 2-point-something points per game. Maliq Brown's not the type of player that's going to need to get back into this ultra huge offensive rhythm when he comes back to play. Like, he's not Kyrie Irving, right? You don't have to, he's not going to disrupt. Like, if somebody else finds a groove while Malik is out, he's not going to disrupt what they're doing offensively by being reinserted into the lineup. Like, a lot of people argued that's what happened with Kyrie when he came back and he kind of messed up Nolan Smith or whatever. That's not going to happen. Maliq Brown, it's going to be a lot easier for him to reintegrate into the lineup because he does what he does. He plays defense at a high level. So if he's physically ready to do that and he's been getting reps in practice, he should be fine. Duke does not rely on him to score points. And so I think that's a positive, that it shouldn't be difficult for him to reintegrate. I'm not too terribly concerned about this. I think there are games where Duke's certainly going to miss him. I think like at Wake Forest, I would have liked to have him there. Does that mean they're going to lose at Wake? No. They might, but probably not. Similar thing. Carolina and Cameron. Are they going to lose that game? Who knows? They're the favorite. They're the favorite with or without him. But it certainly wouldn't have hurt to have him.
Well, when you lose a candidate for National Defensive Player of the Year, it's obviously going to have an impact. And I think we saw a little bit of that at the end of the Notre Dame game. I think we definitely saw it in the Miami game, where that Lynn kid looked more like Jason Kidd out there, shooting 10 out of 17 from the floor. And he had the prototype the whole game. I'm sitting there looking at him. He's 6'10", 240, and I'm thinking, man, we need to put Maliq Brown on that guy to shut him down, So that exposes a weakness on the team. But on the other side of the ledger, you've got Mason Gillis coming in and filling up the basket on the offensive end of the floor. And really, we're creating some additional bench strength for sure for when Brown comes back. That's always the silver lining of any injury. And some other guys are going to get some run. We'll be a deeper team as a result long term. I think the game that bothers me the most would be the Clemson game, February 8th, because they got some good interior players. Assuming we beat Carolina, like you say, Carolina is definitely not strong on the inside. So maybe we can, get by without Malik for a few weeks. But I would love to have him back for that Clemson game for sure.
Let's talk about what the plan is for replacing Malik, or at least putting a Band-Aid over the absence of Maliq Brown for the time being. We got a glimpse of that against Miami, right? Kaman Malawach is the ultimate solution. More minutes for Malawach, more touches for Malawach, more defensive reps for Malawach. And he has stepped up to that challenge in a massive way. Now, Malik played for a little bit against, Notre Dame, obviously, but it was Kaman mostly taking the lead, taking charge, and he played 32 minutes in that game, which is a lot more than he's ever played in a game before. And you could probably tell a little bit by the end of the game. He was a bit gassed, but 19 and 10, by far his best player, or his best game as a Blue Devil. And then he follows that up with 12 and 15 against Miami. And so he's putting up these big double-doubles, these big numbers. Finally, Duke is looking for Malawach, which I've been begging and pleading for. And they're looking for him immediately. Like, the first play of almost every single game Duke plays is a lob action or a dump down to Malawach, and I think that's beautiful, and I love it. But I've loved seeing him step up in Brown's absence. Now, there are obvious drawbacks to that. Now, Malawach, while he is a fantastic defender, he's a young defender, and while he is a versatile defender, he's not quite as versatile as Maliq Brown. So, he can defend guards on the perimeter, but he's not quite as good at reacting to that first step. He can get taken off the dribble a lot more easily. He makes young mistakes defensively a lot more frequently. And so when you look at the difference between Brown and Maliks there's certainly a defensive difference. They do different things. But I've enjoyed seeing Maliks do even more than he was already making a natural progression as the season was moving forward. But he's doing even more now, and he's doing even better now. Now, the other sides of the replacement are increased minutes, minutes at all for Patrick Gongba, and then Mason Gillis and Cooper Flagg sort of sharing more of an increased front court presence, although John has been candid about the fact that he doesn't want to disrupt what Cooper's doing. So if he plays small ball, he actually prefers Mason Gillis in there, which I think is interesting. I don't know how much I actually want to see of that, but if it works, I guess. As for Patrick Gongba, he's not really ready, I don't think, to play high-level ball at the moment, at a consistent high-minute basis. But he's, how else is he going to get to that point without reps? And so I think right now is an opportunity for Pat to get some serious reps in. We started seeing it against Miami. He had an okay game. He had his moments. He's continuing to get better. There are moments where he's put up some pretty solid post moves that I've liked. He's got good footwork. There's no doubt about that. Not a perfect defender. He's certainly no Maliq Brown replacement there. But he's working, and hopefully he can become a dependable presence as a Maliq Brown replacement for the time being in moments. How comfortable are you with the way that they decided to make up for Malik's absence against Miami? Who would you like to see more of, less of, that kind of thing?
Well, Gillis has really stepped forward. I think 12 points in 20 minutes against Miami, and Maliks, as you said, he had 12 points also in 20 minutes. So interesting there between the two of them. That equals 40 minutes of play and 24 points on the board. Maliks also had 15 rebounds, so he is definitely stepping up. To get 15 rebounds in 20 minutes is a pretty high clip. The only thing Maliks can't seem to do is win the opening tip. But I'm starting to get convinced that maybe he does that on purpose so we can start out on defense, Maybe he wants to get a block or something. But yeah, they're learning to feed him. Everybody's doing a better job of feeding the big guy. I'm not really that concerned, other than, like I said, that one guy, Kid, going off kind of exposes the weakness there. Who do we put on somebody like that? He was a bit of a mismatch for us. Gamba, he did okay. He only took 3 shots in almost 20 minutes of play also. But that's to be expected. I think the most mystifying guy on the court was Tyrese Proctor, actually. He was almost missing in action, and you would think he might be a candidate to step up to another level. But he only took 4 shots and missed them all, and kind of a mystery game. Hopefully that was a one-off for Tyrese.
Well, I don't know. It might be a 2-off at this point. I think we need to put up missing posters for Tyrese. 0 in that one, 3 in the game before. Right. Not doing a ton offensively right now. I mean, he's not playing poorly, obviously. I think defensively he's doing fine. But kind of taking a step back offensively. I don't know if maybe that was just because Cooper was such a ball-dominant player against Notre Dame. Against Miami, I don't really know what the reason for the lack of offense or offensive struggle there was. But I'd like to see him come back around. I think there was a moment where he kind of looked like Duke's second best player. I think clearly he's taken a step back down to maybe even Duke's 4th best player at this point. I think Maliks has surpassed him, and Concanipple obviously has as well. So yeah, I'd like to see Tyrese get back to being a scoring threat, because there was a good little while there where he looked like he was easily an all-conference performer. And yeah, I hope this is just a small slump and not some sort of revert to a previous version of himself.
Right. We saw Khan reverting to his earlier version by not being able to miss, which was nice. There are going to be ebbs and flows. Players go through slumps during the course of a season. So hopefully this is temporary. We also saw a little bit of a reversion on Cooper's part. He had 6 turnovers in that game and started to get sloppy in his handle, which was, an issue of concern earlier in the season. So, you know, to be expected, I suppose. They're young, they're growing. They're not going to be perfect every game. You can't put 42 on the board every time. And it was a quiet night for Cooper against Miami. 13 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists, which would be great for most people. But for Cooper, it's like, he's not playing that well, compared to what he did the game before.
Well, a couple things about that game from Cooper. One, if he's going to have 6 turnovers, he picked a pretty good game. I'd rather him do it than rather against Carolina or at Clemson or at Wake Forest. So, like, if you really had it in your system to have 6 turnovers in a game, I'm glad you got it out against the worst team in the conference. I think previously I had bestowed that honor on Virginia Tech. I'm stealing that honor from the Hokies. It belongs to the Hurricanes outright. They're horrible. The other thing about Cooper, and I've talked about this so many times, but he does what he has to do to win a basketball game. And like against Notre Dame, he needed to score 42 points because like offense wasn't coming from other places. But against Miami, you get the read. Khan's hot, man. He's hitting shots. You've got offense coming from other places. Even Mason Gillis is coming in, stepping up off the bench. And so for Coop, it's like, heck, do I need to score 42 today? Like, there's no point in doing that. And he's fine taking that step back and just doing what the team needs of him. It's such a mature approach to the game. It's kind of, maybe it's a little bit oxymoronic to say a mature approach to the game for a guy who did have 6 turnovers in a game. But I think his ability to kind of read each game individually is beyond impressive. And so I think that that's kind of what happened a little bit against Miami. But I want to talk about Khan a little bit more because I want to key in on just how much better Duke is when Khan Knippel is playing basketball at a high level and shooting the ball at a high level. Because early in the season, in the preseason specifically, we were talking crazy about this team because they had just beat Arizona State by 56 or whatever it was. And so it was like, why did that happen? And what was a big driving factor, at least, was Khan Knippel playing at such a high level and shooting the ball at such a high level. And that continued in the early season. And I think then you get that stretch where they pick up the 2 losses to Kansas and Kentucky. They play a close game with Auburn, that kind of thing. You've got some games where Khan Knippel's really just not shooting the ball well. When Khan is shooting the ball confidently, he's squared up and he's doing it well. Duke is almost unbeatable in college basketball this season. I think he is genuinely the key. Like Cooper Flagg can have a Cooper Flagg game. Obviously, he can score 42 and Duke can still be in a game that is decided by single digits with Notre Dame, who's not even really a very good team. So Cooper Flagg can't just single-handedly will you to victory every day. He can try, and he certainly will, but he's not going to succeed 10 times out of 10. But I think if you've got Cooper Flagg doing what Cooper Flagg does, and then Khan Knippel comes in and he shoots that ball with confidence and accuracy, that's when Duke's a national champion.
Well, I think you're right about a lot of things there. Cooper is very mature with his game. He knows what's needed, and he reads the room, so to speak, and he delivers whatever the team needs for him to do. He's very good about getting other people involved, most notably Khan. They're like Batman and Robin. I think I've used the analogy before. And Khan was going off. In fact, the whole team was going off. We were 11 out of 17 from 3 in the first half. And, it was almost a more than double situation with the halftime score. So, yeah, they're hitting a whole nother gear when Khan is doing that sort of thing. And it was glorious to watch. Stress-free night at Cameron Indoor. We were able to hit the exits more than a few minutes early. Pretty confident that we had that one salted away.
Well, one that kind of faltered at the end, and I think we've alluded to it plenty of times now, but we got to address it. Duke was up 18 with 4.5 minutes to play. against Notre Dame. That lead ends up dwindling, I think, to as low as 4, maybe 5. They ultimately win the game by 8. And it was this kind of limbo situation where it was pretty clear that they wanted to get the ball to Cooper. The crowd wanted 40. I think he wanted 40. Teammates wanted him to get 40. But Notre Dame kind of runs this zone where they're focusing and they're trapping in on the middle. For me, when I first saw that, I'm thinking, why in the world do they continue to run him in the middle? Like, I know that he is the best player to be there to break that zone, but if that zone is designed to eliminate the middle, why not take him out of the middle? Just put somebody else in the middle, give him the ball, let him cook. They hadn't stopped him all game. They weren't going to start then. But they were doing a good job of denying him the ball, and then no one else had shot the ball for like 12 minutes. And so they were cold as ice, couldn't hit a thing. And then Notre Dame, honestly, the whole night, and tip of the cap to Notre Dame because they never gave up, and they shot the freaking lights out for most of the night. Like Notre Dame played out of their mind in that game, and still lost because that's just how well Cooper Flagg performed. But I don't know. I don't know what to make of it because I was sitting there thinking, I cannot believe they're allowing this to happen. But I wasn't. But like at the end of the game, buzzer sounds. I wasn't sitting there thinking, "Oh crap! Like this is a really bad sign for this team." I was just thinking, "Well, that was stupid. Like, why did they allow that to happen?" I didn't view it as like a big major problem going forward. That kind of collapse over the last few minutes. What was your take on that collapse? Were you concerned? What level was your concern at?
Well, I was in the parking lot, so I must not have been too concerned. I left. I left when Duke was up 18, and I thought, this game's over. But I listened to it on the radio, and by the time I got to my car, it was down to 5. And I turned to my brother and said, I wonder if they'll let us back in so we can watch the end of this game. But no, I think it was maybe fatigue, for one thing, maybe not adapting well to the loss of Malik and the redistribution of minutes. They looked a little gassed. Reminded me of some of the early games where they had similar issues, like against Kentucky. And, it's also natural to take your eye off the prize when you're comfortably ahead and you're going to win. And then all of a sudden, it was a good wake-up call without having to get the actual wake-up call. So hopefully they'll learn from it.
Well, they seem to be learning from it. Bounced back certainly against Miami, but like, what does that mean? Because Miami kind of sucks. I don't know. I mean, and again, they play Boston College on Saturday, so like, if they blow Boston College out, what does that really mean? Not a lot. I'm pretty sure that Miami win is a quad 4 win. By the way,
they have quad 5. Like, they might be in quad 5.
They should create one for Miami. Boston College would be quad 4, but it's on the road, so it's quad 3. Yeah, that's rough.
Well, yeah, and there's a danger with all these patsies that we're playing to get sort of fat, dumb, and happy and not really be challenged by anybody potentially until Illinois. And that's not really good preparation for what's to come. That's the real downfall of the ACC. They're not really going to get challenged by much of anybody all year long. And, I think back to the Kentucky team of 2015 that rolled into the tournament undefeated and, looking like they were going to take it. But if you don't get tested when the real test comes, it can be a bit of a shock to the system.
There are some interesting games, not games that Duke's favored to lose by any means, but interesting games coming up. I mean, there's a 3-game stretch after Boston College where they go to Wake, they play State, and they host Carolina. Then the State game I'm not overly concerned about. Tyrese and Caleb have talked about how they're looking forward to playing State, and after having watched State play a couple of times, I'm not concerned about that one at all. The Wake Forest one at Wake's always interesting. Like, it doesn't really matter how good Wake is. They always make that game closer than it should be. And so that's kind of what I expect. And that one, of course, there was the whole giant thing that happened last year with the court storming and Kyle. And so maybe Duke needs to exact some revenge on the Deeks. But that one will be interesting. And then I think that, like, look at the Carolina game. That one's always going to be closer than you want it to be, or at least usually it is. With any luck, it won't be, but it probably will. And so those are going to be tests. Wake Forest, Carolina, those are tests. You mentioned the Clemson game. That's certain to be a pretty big test. It's always difficult to come in and win at Clemson, and especially when they actually have a pretty decent NCAA tournament-like team. Now, those are the three that I'm really looking at here. I think once you get out of that Clemson game, you got three gimmies. You got Cal, Stanford, Virginia, who cares? Then you got the Illinois game, and then they'll probably end the season on 3 wins there pretty easily before going to Carolina. There's only a handful of games that you even have to remotely be concerned about on this schedule. And so I guess that is, you don't want them to get, like you said, you don't want them to be fat, dumb, and happy, man. Like, you want them to be on edge, on their toes, remembering the taste of defeat and not wanting to feel that again. If they run the table, which I'm not saying they will, but if they did, they will have not tasted defeat since November 26th, which that's a long time, man. And you got to hope maybe they haven't forgotten that feeling by March.
Yeah, well, you're talking to the wrong guy because I had them still undefeated at this point in our preseason picking of the games. So my crystal ball gets pretty foggy pretty fast.
Man, you might not have got the games right, but they do run the table. I think you might have got the record right.
Yeah, that's a possibility. I think I said 2 losses, and they've got 2 losses, so we're on track.
Still very much in play. Still very much in play. All right, well, we'll have to see about that. But as for now, thanks, as always, for listening to the podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. Go to the website, check out articles, check out the podcast there as well. Go follow Duke Wisdom on Instagram, Twitter, and Blue Sky. And we will talk to you guys later.